A war named for 7 years remade entire centuries. It began as a struggle among crowns and ended by deciding oceans, trade routes, credit systems, colonial empires, and the future rebellions of continents. The 7 Years' War was not merely another European conflict. It was the moment the old dynastic order collided with a new global economy, and from that collision emerged the modern world. By the middle of the 18th century, Europe still appeared to be governed by familiar rules. Monarchs maneuvered for provinces, ministers calibrated alliances, and armies marched in pursuit of dynastic advantage. Yet beneath that surface, something far larger was taking shape. Commerce had expanded beyond any single court's comprehension. Atlantic trade linked plantations, slave ports, merchant houses, insurers, and naval stations into one immense circulatory system. In India, European trading companies had ceased to be mere guests and were becoming political actors amid the fragmentation of Mughal authority. In North America, imperial borders were less fixed frontiers than zones of swelling pressure, where settlers, indigenous confederacies, soldiers, and speculators pressed rival empires toward confrontation. The old statecraft of balancing territories was becoming inadequate because territory alone no longer measured power. Sea lanes measured power. Credit measured power. Colonial labor measured power. The ability to disrupt another empire's trade and finance measured power. The statesmen of Europe were beginning to discover that they were no longer managing a mosaic of realms. They were managing a system. And systems are unforgiving to miscalculation. The prelude to this transformation was the diplomatic revolution of 1756 AD, one of those moments when history reveals that permanent alliances are often only temporary habits. For generations, Bourbon France and Habsburg Austria had stood as traditional rivals. Britain had often opposed France while viewing continental commitments with caution. Prussia, under Frederick II, had risen with alarming speed, seizing Silesia from Austria in the War of the Austrian Succession and thereby humiliating Maria Theresa while announcing that a new military power had entered the European arena. Austria wanted Silesia back. That objective was not symbolic. Silesia was wealthy, strategic, and central to Habsburg prestige. But Austria had learned an austere lesson: old alignments were not enough to defeat Prussia. Therefore, under the guidance of the statesman Kaunitz, Vienna pursued a startling realignment. France and Austria, enemies by tradition, moved toward partnership. Britain, fearing both French maritime power and the possibility of a continental collapse that might expose Hanover, moved toward Prussia. Russia, increasingly wary of Prussian momentum in Central Europe, leaned into the anti-Prussian coalition. Spain hesitated at first, watching the geometry shift, but the Bourbon connection ensured that the wider struggle would eventually draw Madrid closer to France's cause. This inversion of alliances was not theatrical court intrigue. It was recognition that the geopolitical map had changed shape. Britain understood that the central struggle with France would not be decided solely in Germany. France understood that British wealth and naval reach threatened Bourbon influence on a global scale. Austria understood that Prussia could not be contained by sentiment or tradition. Russia understood that a stronger Prussia might alter the balance across Eastern and Central Europe for generations. Each power saw only part of the coming storm, but each sensed that a concession in one theater could produce inferiority across many others. That is how regional rivalry becomes systemic conflict. The geography of the war confirms this transformation. In Europe, the issue was not merely prestige. Austria sought recovery of Silesia and the rollback of Prussian ascent. France sought to restrain Britain globally while preserving its rank as a great continental monarchy. Britain feared invasion and continental entanglement, but increasingly grasped that maritime supremacy and colonial conquest might matter more than territorial prizes in Germany. Russia sought leverage, influence, and strategic depth against an unsettling Prussian dynamism. But the struggle did not stop at Europe's edge. In North America, British and French ambitions collided in the Ohio Valley, where river systems and interior access mattered as instruments of continental command. In the Caribbean, sugar islands produced extraordinary wealth, and therefore islands small on a map became colossal in imperial arithmetic. In West Africa, forts and slave trading routes fed the Atlantic world, binding military strategy to human exploitation on an enormous scale. In India, the breakdown of larger imperial cohesion allowed European companies to insert armed commerce into local politics, making profit and sovereignty increasingly inseparable. The 7 Years' War became global because the economy was already global. The war simply revealed the fact with cannon fire. Human stakes sharpened every calculation. Cabinets faced debts and feared bankruptcy. Aristocracies faced the code of honor and feared humiliation. Merchants feared disruption, seizure, and insolvency. Colonists feared abandonment, raids, and strategic neglect. Monarchs feared the one outcome that haunts every ruling system, the loss of prestige that invites future aggression. Therefore compromise became harder precisely when prudence demanded it. A ministry might know that one frontier was not worth a general war, but a concession there could unsettle allies, embolden enemies, panic creditors, and damage legitimacy at home. The conflict escalated because every actor believed that retreat in the present might purchase catastrophe in the future. Such fears were not irrational. They were the operating logic of an interconnected age. Once war came, victory depended on more than courage or battlefield skill. It required the rare capacity to connect finance, logistics, alliance management, intelligence, and strategic prioritization into one coherent method. Few states have ever mastered that fusion. During the 7 Years' War, Britain came closest, largely because one statesman perceived the structure of the contest with unusual clarity. William Pitt the Elder recognized a brutal truth: Britain should use treasure to preserve blood, subsidize continental resistance to pin down enemies, and apply naval superiority to strike where imperial gains would be decisive. This was not glamorous theory. It was portfolio strategy on a global scale. Support Prussia so that France and its partners remained absorbed in Europe. Use the Royal Navy to choke French commerce, isolate French colonies, and choose when and where to attack overseas. Convert insular security into global initiative. Pitt understood that Britain did not need to dominate every battlefield. It needed to dominate the structure of the war. That structure rested on sea power, but sea power alone is never enough. The British state had to mobilize credit, taxation, supply systems, and political will. Fleets required timber, dockyards, victualling, convoy systems, and disciplined administration. Armies overseas required transport and sustainment across oceans. Subsidies to allies required confidence from bankers and parliament alike. Britain's strategic method succeeded because it linked national finance to naval force and naval force to imperial opportunity. Here lies one of history's hardest truths: enduring power is not just what a state can destroy. It is what a state can continuously sustain. France, by contrast, remained formidable in manpower, military tradition, and prestige, but faced a structural dilemma that proved increasingly corrosive. France had continental obligations, colonial holdings, naval competition, and fiscal weaknesses that made coherent prioritization difficult. It could still field impressive armies and produce moments of genuine military strength. But it was pulled in too many directions at once. To defend Canada, challenge Britain at sea, support continental operations, preserve influence in India, and maintain European stature all at the same time required a degree of institutional integration that France struggled to sustain. Great powers rarely collapse because they are weak everywhere. They falter because they cannot decide what matters most. This is where Prussia enters as one of the war's most extraordinary anomalies. Frederick II commanded a state of alarming vulnerability. Prussia possessed military excellence but not deep demographic reserves. Its finances were constrained. Its enemies surrounded it. Austria sought revenge. Russia brought immense manpower. France could pressure from the west. Smaller German states might align against it. Under such conditions, conventional caution might have seemed prudent. But conventional caution would likely have invited strangulation. Therefore Frederick chose speed, interior lines, discipline, and preemption. His invasion of Saxony in 1756 AD was strategically audacious and politically inflammatory. It did not make him popular in Europe, it made him dangerous. The purpose was clear: disrupt encirclement before it hardened into inevitability. This was the logic of a commander who understood that waiting can be more reckless than striking first. Yet brilliance in war carries its own poison. Frederick's methods demanded relentless exertion from a small kingdom. They depended on superior drilling, rapid concentration, and the ability to exploit enemy slowness or division. Such a model can produce spectacular victories. But it leaves little margin for error. If one campaign goes badly, the entire edifice shudders. Therefore Prussia's war became a sequence of calculated gambles in which every triumph bought time but seldom security. Austria's strategy, by contrast, was patient and sober. Maria Theresa did not seek theatrical glory. Her objective was focused: recover Silesia, restore Habsburg authority, and check Prussia before its rise became irreversible. Kaunitz's diplomatic achievement was immense because it broke old assumptions and assembled a coalition around Austria's central aim. In some ways Vienna played the alliance game brilliantly. But coalitions suffer from a chronic problem. Their aggregate strength can be enormous, while their operational unity remains fragile. Each ally has distinct motives, timelines, and tolerances for risk. Therefore the anti-Prussian camp often possessed more power in theory than in execution. Russia contributed the terrifying weight of the coalition. Russian armies repeatedly pushed deep into the conflict and brought Prussia to the edge of ruin. Yet Russian strategy was burdened by distance, supply strains, communication delays, and the turbulence inherent in imperial court politics. Armies can march far. But political resolve must also survive the journey. This mismatch between battlefield potential and strategic continuity would become one of the war's decisive factors. Throughout the conflict, intelligence and logistics mattered as much as battlefield valor. Couriers, code systems, informants, contractors, magazines, roads, depots, and naval convoy schedules formed the invisible skeleton of the war. A fleet delayed by poor provisioning could squander an entire campaign season. An army lacking forage or ammunition could lose without being tactically outclassed. A ministry that failed to reassure creditors might discover that military plans dissolve faster than armies do. Power is never merely force. It is force married to endurance, financing, perception, and the ruthless wisdom to identify the decisive theater. Frederick's early campaigns revealed both the genius and the peril of high-tempo war. At Rossbach in 1757 AD, a Franco-imperial force suffered a humiliating defeat against a much more agile Prussian army. The significance of Rossbach was psychological as much as military. It restored Prussian credibility at a moment when enemies had hoped to expose Frederick as reckless and overextended. But Rossbach alone could not save Prussia. Therefore another blow followed at Leuthen in 1757 AD, where Frederick shattered Austrian forces through maneuver, timing, and disciplined execution. Leuthen entered military memory as a masterpiece because it demonstrated how mobility and concentration could defeat larger forces under the right conditions. Yet the deeper lesson is harsher. Tactical brilliance did not end the war. It merely prevented immediate collapse. This is the recurring tragedy of strategic history: a state may win glorious battles while remaining one bad season away from destruction. That truth became undeniable at Kunersdorf in 1759 AD. There Prussia suffered near catastrophe against Russian and Austrian forces. The defeat was not a dramatic inconvenience. It was existential. Frederick's kingdom approached exhaustion. Resources were thinning. Manpower losses were grievous. Administrative strain mounted. The coalition seemed, for a moment, poised to finish what years of pressure had prepared. Here the fog of war becomes most instructive. Later generations often narrate survival as if it had been inevitable because survival eventually occurred. But nothing in 1759 AD felt inevitable. A tactically brilliant state can be strategically near death. History often hangs not on the superiority of one side, but on whether exhausted enemies can synchronize their final blow. While Prussia fought for existence in Europe, Britain exploited the wider architecture of the war with remarkable effectiveness. The year 1759 AD became Britain's Annus Mirabilis, a year of wonders whose victories were linked by method rather than accident. At sea, triumphs at Lagos and Quiberon Bay crippled French hopes of invasion and confirmed British command of the maritime arena. Quiberon Bay in particular was a strategic verdict. Once French invasion prospects receded and naval initiative passed decisively to Britain, the Royal Navy gained not merely tactical confidence but strategic freedom. Sea control meant colonies could be reinforced, enemy trade could be disrupted, and imperial operations could proceed with a degree of choice unavailable to rivals. Command of the sea did not guarantee universal success, but it transformed the menu of possible successes. In North America, the fall of Quebec in 1759 AD carried immense symbolic and strategic significance. New France had long depended on a difficult network of communication, supply, and alliance stretching through river systems and fortified positions. But French imperial geography in North America, for all its reach, was vulnerable to sustained maritime pressure and British demographic weight along the seaboard. Therefore, when British operations converged effectively, the fate of New France grew increasingly precarious. Quebec's fall did not by itself complete the conquest, but it made the long-term strategic outcome difficult to reverse. In India, the significance of Plassey in 1757 AD extends far beyond battlefield narrative. The British East India Company had already learned to exploit local political fragmentation, commercial opportunity, and military leverage in combination. Plassey revealed that a corporation could intervene not merely as merchant but as kingmaker. Afterward, British political leverage in India expanded beyond commerce into governance, taxation, and territorial ambition. This was one of the most consequential transformations of the entire war because it fused capitalism and sovereignty in a form that would shape modern empire. The empire of ledgers was becoming an empire of laws, armies, and extraction. These British victories were not isolated episodes scattered conveniently across the globe. They were the visible expression of strategic coherence. Britain subsidized where land war would be most expensive, struck where naval power produced disproportionate returns, and converted commercial strength into military endurance. France and its partners still possessed dangerous capabilities. But Britain increasingly dictated the tempo of imperial decision. Such command did not emerge from a single genius or a single ship. It emerged from a state that had aligned finance, policy, and force more effectively than its rivals. Yet even coherent strategy remains vulnerable to contingency. The 7 Years' War offers no simplistic morality tale in which the clever always triumph and the muddled always fail. Prussia's survival, in particular, depended not only on Frederick's endurance but on one of the most dramatic reversals of fortune in diplomatic history, the so-called miracle of the House of Brandenburg in 1762 AD. Empress Elizabeth of Russia died. Her successor, Peter III, admired Frederick and abruptly reversed Russian hostility. One death altered the strategic geometry of Europe more decisively than many campaigns. Here lies the cold grammar of power. States plan, generals maneuver, ministers calculate, bankers lend, and soldiers bleed. But then succession intervenes, and years of design can be overturned by the mortality of one sovereign. Russia's withdrawal transformed Prussia's prospects. An enemy whose pressure had nearly proved fatal disappeared from the coalition's active weight. Austria, deprived of that immense support, found the destruction of Prussia far harder to achieve. Thus Prussia survived not because war is fair, but because history is often settled where preparation collides with chance. By 1763 AD, the peace settlements at Paris and Hubertusburg did more than end campaigns. They codified a new hierarchy of possibilities. Britain emerged with vast imperial advantage. France retained dignity as a great power, but lost strategic position in ways that would alter the next generation of conflict. Prussia retained Silesia and secured recognition as a genuine great power. Austria failed in its central aim despite formidable diplomatic effort. The map changed. But more importantly, the future changed. The distribution of options, fears, and ambitions had been rewritten. Britain's triumph seemed magnificent, and in many respects it was. The kingdom emerged as the preeminent global maritime and colonial power. Control of key imperial spaces, command of sea routes, and the weakening of French overseas competition granted London extraordinary leverage. But victory carried burdens that triumphalist narratives often conceal. War was expensive. Debt rose dramatically. Expanded empire required administration, garrisons, taxation, and new systems of oversight. The British state, having won a global war, now needed revenue to manage a global inheritance. Therefore London turned more aggressively toward extracting resources from North American colonies. Here the war produced one of history's most elegant and destructive paradoxes. The conflict removed France as the principal military threat to Britain's 13 colonies. But by removing that threat, it also weakened the colonists' dependence on imperial protection. Simultaneously, British attempts to raise revenue increased resentment. Imperial success therefore destabilized imperial obedience. The war that secured the empire also loosened the logic that had held part of it together. France's defeat was severe, but defeat did not produce resignation. It produced revisionism. Great powers rarely accept humiliation as a final condition. They reinterpret it as an unpaid debt of honor and strategy. French losses sharpened the desire for revenge against Britain, and that desire would help shape France's later support for the American Revolution. Such support was not charity toward liberty. It was strategic retaliation by another means. This is one of history's recurring patterns. A defeated great power often becomes most dangerous when it stops contesting the present and begins financing the future. Prussia's survival also had consequences far beyond immediate diplomacy. Its prestige now exceeded its size. The kingdom was no longer a troublesome anomaly. It was a durable great power that had stared into near extinction and endured. The psychological result was immense. Across Europe, Prussia commanded new respect and new fear. In later German history, this elevation would echo with profound force. States are not shaped only by what they own. They are shaped by the stories they tell about their own survival. Frederick's Prussia gained such a story, and Europe would live with its consequences. In India, the war's legacy may be even more transformative. What began as competition among trading companies hardened into territorial dominion. The British East India Company discovered that profit could be protected by force, and force could be financed by political control. Revenue collection, military recruitment, diplomatic coercion, and commercial privilege fused into a new model of empire. This was not the old empire of dynastic annexation alone. It was an empire in which a corporation learned to act as a sovereign. The implications are staggering. Modern discussions of capitalism, private power, and empire still live in the shadow of this development. The war also exposed the psychology of empire with exceptional clarity. Empires often believe that the greatest danger lies in losing. But the 7 Years' War demonstrates that victory can be equally destabilizing if its consequences are misunderstood. Winning expands obligations. It multiplies frontiers. It encourages administrative overconfidence. It tempts rulers to believe that success in one environment guarantees obedience in another. It convinces elites that the system has been vindicated when, in fact, the system may have become more brittle. Empires rarely fall because they fail to win. They often fall because they do not understand what winning has done to them. This is the deepest strategic lesson of the conflict. The 7 Years' War settled one contest only by igniting several more. Britain's victory prepared the conditions for imperial overreach and colonial resistance. France's defeat prepared the psychology of revenge. Prussia's survival prepared a new balance in Central Europe. India's transformation prepared a larger and more extractive imperial order. Even the apparent finality of 1763 AD concealed an unstable inheritance. Human beings are drawn to the fantasy of closure. A treaty is signed, a map is redrawn, and statesmen congratulate themselves on restored order. But history rarely offers closure. It offers transition. Therefore the true cost of the 7 Years' War is not measured only in the dead, the debt, or the territories exchanged. It is measured in the new chain reactions set in motion by victory and defeat alike. The verdict, then, is severe and unmistakable. The 7 Years' War was the first conflict in which the decisive unit of analysis was not merely the kingdom or the battlefield, but the interconnected world system itself. It revealed that commerce, naval supremacy, colonial expansion, dynastic ambition, and state finance had fused into one machinery of power. Britain mastered that machinery more effectively than its rivals and emerged with the initiative in the modern world. Prussia survived long enough, fought skillfully enough, and benefited from contingency enough to secure great power status. France and Austria remained formidable, but their central aims were frustrated. The cost was enormous, and the peace was only an armed intermission in a larger age of upheaval. The modern mirror is impossible to ignore. The same pattern still governs geopolitics. States proclaim local aims while operating within global systems they do not fully control. Supply chains replace convoys, finance moves faster than fleets, and corporations still influence sovereignty in ways earlier monarchs could scarcely have imagined. Leaders still mistake tactical success for strategic security. Great powers still discover that dominance in one arena creates vulnerability in another. Victories still generate debts, resentments, dependencies, and overconfidence. The grammar has evolved, but the sentence remains familiar. This war reveals a permanent feature of human nature. Power is pursued as if it can finally solve insecurity, yet every major accumulation of power creates a larger field of insecurity around it. That is why the 7 Years' War still matters. It was not simply a prelude to later revolutions. It was the demonstration that modernity itself would be born through networks of violence, finance, commerce, and imperial competition too vast for any one ruler to fully command. The old courts believed they were contesting provinces. In truth, they were contesting the architecture of a new world. And in doing so, they exposed a final and uncomfortable truth about civilization. The more connected humanity becomes, the less likely any conflict remains local, and the more every victory carries hidden liabilities. The legacy question endures long after the treaties. When a civilization gains the power to shape the world, does it also gain the wisdom to survive the consequences of its own success, or does triumph merely enlarge the scale of its future mistakes?